All right, so let's continue on with the Islamic faith. I realized I forgot to mention the term about jihad because I put it in there in the first part of the video under the key words. The idea with the word jihad, that's also part of the characteristics of Islamic faith, does not mean what a lot of people think it means. A lot of times we hear the word jihad and we immediately think it means holy war. Actually, the word jihad means holy effort. So you could actually have non-violent jihads. And in fact, a lot of the idea of jihad is about inner striving to better yourself. Why do we associate it very often with violence as well? Because how the word has been used in various elements of the Islamic faith that did have violent events associated with it. It's kind of like the word crusade, which we'll talk about later. I mean, what does the word crusade mean? Can you have a non-violent crusade? Yeah, I'm a crusade to do well in my class. It has nothing to do with faith or violence. So it's just how the words are used sometimes that matter. So I just wanted to mention that because I think I forgot to talk about that in the other video. So anyways, we're going to kind of continue on with the rest of the story of the Islamic faith. We're still on the characteristics of the Islamic faith. So we talked about the origins. We're talking about the characteristics. So the jihad idea is something you want to know about as well also. So let's move on. And one of the other issues that we always need to discuss is the role of women in the Islamic faith. And I put, what did the sources say? So for this, I also want you, other than me lecturing, there's stuff in your textbook on a lot of this material. This now that we're into kind of the classical Islamic period, your textbook has a lot more information. So you definitely want to read about the other elements and characteristics of the Islamic faith in your textbook, but also the primary sources. So if I give you like primary sources on the role of women, what do they say? How do you interpret it? And this is true of any monotheistic religion. It's just like how do you interpret things matter. I'm just going to give you kind of one here, and then the rest of them you can kind of look at the primary sources that I'll try to find for you here. It talks about in the Quran that a man may have up to 4 wives, and people read that and go, "Well, okay, what does that mean?" Well, it says a man may have up to 4 wives, provided that he could care and love for all of them equally. So what does that mean? Well, you'll talk to one Islamic scholar and he says, well, man can have 4 wives. You'll talk to another Islamic scholar and says, no, you can only have one because it's impossible to care and love for them all equally. And so this is true of many of the passages in the entire Quran, not just ones that have to do with women. It is very often, just like any religion, how you interpret it. Very often I say, any religion is what its followers make it out to be. And how one interprets these ideas is what makes the religion the way it is. And so that's why two people can live in be following the Muslim faith and interpret it very differently in terms of what rights women have and what role women have. So that's just something I think important to note as well. Okay, so definitely want to know about that. Uh, Mosques, right? This is another characteristics of the Islamic faith, and a couple more key terms here to understand about that. The mosque is, of course, the place of worship. This is a really good image of a mosque in what is modern day Istanbul. And when you talk about a mosque, what designates it a mosque is these minarets. Now, this is an interesting building, actually. This mosque used to be a church. It was called the Church of Hagia Sophia. And it was a church built for when the Byzantine Empire, if you're not familiar with the Byzantine Empire, we'll talk about them a little bit later. But in what it used to be Constantinople, Byzantium, Constantinople, and it was a church. And then when the Islamic faith took over Constantinople, they changed it into a mosque. And then it became a kind of museum for anybody to go and just visit. And then in the year 2020, Turkey changed it back into a mosque. So it's kind of an interesting dynamics to it. So this particular one. So one way you can recognize it's a mosque is because of the minarets. And the minarets are these towers that you see here. And the minarets, they're not just there because they look pretty. They're there for practical function. They're there for the prayer. Remember the 5 times a day you pray. And so in this case, in the olden days, you'd have a person sitting there called a muezzin. You can see that term there. And they would lead the prayers. Today, if you go to the Middle East, they just put loudspeakers and it just bellows out and you could hear it for long distances. But that's a mosque. One of the other characteristics of the Islamic faith is there is a prohibition of imagery in the Islamic faith. And so, you don't, if you go into a church, will you see images of Christ and so forth? And the answer is, of course, yes. In Islam, you're not going to see those images. So people go, well, does that mean because you don't have, images allowed and you're not allowed to recreate it, does that mean the mosques are kind of boring and dull? And the answer is absolutely not. I found these remarkable pictures of a mosque in Iran called the Pink Mosque. So let me just show you a couple images. But these are just stunning of a mosque in Iran. And again, it's called the Pink Mosque, and you see a lot of geometrical styles. So you could create some very, very beautiful mosques even without, images of people, as you could see in this one, for example. And here's just another image of it, kind of very almost like 70s psychedelic. I don't know, but just I always thought it was beautiful, this mosque. So you have that. All right, moving on. So the spread of Islam. So now I want to talk about the spread of the Islamic faith and how it spreads beyond the city of Medina back into Mecca and what that means. So this is very important. When you talk about the early Islamic faith, it was very, very small. Muhammad didn't have millions of supporters or hundred thousands of supporters. It was a very small faith. Of course, today there are over, 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. But back then it was really small. And so immediately the people in Mecca were trying to stop the Islamic faith from growing any further. And so there were these battles that are going to unfold between the people in Mecca and the people in Medina. And there's three battles. I'm going to kind of talk about the first two a little bit. The third one is in your textbook, but you do want to know about them. The first one is the most important, I think. It's called the Battle of Badr. And it's fought in the year 624 AD, right? These are all in Saudi Arabia region, of course. And there's the person named Abu Sufyan. So Abu Sufyan was from Mecca, and he had this massive caravan with him, carrying a lot of things. It was supposed to be a caravan of 1,000 camels and gold and silver and jewelry, just worth something like we got 50,000 dinars, which was their unit of money. Just tremendous amount of wealth. And Muhammad knew that this caravan was going to be traveling nearby where he was in Medina. And so he decided to try to get the caravan, to get the riches and the rewards, to get his supporters in Medina behind him, and so forth. So Muhammad organized 300 men. We're not talking about a huge battle here, to intercept the caravan of Abu Sufyan. And they'll meet at Badr. The people in Mecca got wind of this, that, Muhammad's come trying to take this caravan. And so they sent a man named Abu Jabal with 1,000 men to stop Muhammad. So don't mix up the names. Abu Sufyan, he's leading the caravan. Abu Jabal, they're the two guys from Mecca. They're the ones trying to stop Muhammad. So Abu Jabal had about 1,000 men, and they're going to meet at Badr, right? This location, this little city there, it's about 20 miles southwest of Medina. And so in this image here, I'll explain, is not at the Battle of Badr. I'll explain what that image here is in a second. So the story goes that Muhammad reached the site of the battlefield first, and it's the desert. He knew that when Abu Jabal arrived, the first thing he would do is look for water because they're out in the desert. And Badr was this kind of little oasis with these water holes. And so what Muhammad did, because he's completely outnumbered, as you could see, he was outnumbered 3-1, is he plugged the water wells. And so what he did is he plugged all the water wells, just kind of closed them all around the city of Badr, except for one. He left one water well available. So when the troops of Abu Jabal arrived, Muhammad's kind of hiding his men. They go to one water well, it's closed, until they go to the one that's open, which was strategically left open, apparently, because Muhammad knew that was a good place for him to pounce on the forces of Abu Jabal, which he did, and he won. And so Muhammad wins this first battle, the Battle of Badr. He suffers very few casualties. Abu Jabal, I believe, is killed in this battle, and he gets a lot of momentum. So this is a very important early battle. It gives Muhammad a lot of momentum, helps him begin to get a firm support of the Islamic faith in the Arabian Peninsula. So that was in 624 AD. The very next year, 625 AD, Abu Sufyan was very upset, as you can imagine. His caravan was taken. He's not happy about this. So Abu Sufyan organized about 3,000 men to go after Muhammad. And this image you see here is the actual site of the Battle of Uhud Hill. Again, it's also in the northwest part of Arabia. And it's a kind of considered a historic site there, and people go and visit. And in this battle, actually, apparently Muhammad was injured, and Abu Sufyan kind of had some momentum, but didn't give chase. He didn't kind of pursue Muhammad, and Muhammad survived this battle as well. So Abu Sufyan, while he got the upper hand for a bit, was not really able to press on him and take the advantage and take out Muhammad during this battle of Uhud. So on the Battle of Badr, Muhammad has a very successful victory, and in the Battle of Uhud, he survives the onslaught of Abu Sufyan, maintaining his presence in Medina very effectively. And then there's the Battle of Trenches you could read about in your textbook as well. So what do these battles mean? Why are they important? Well, again, if we look at our map again, the reason they're important is once Muhammad wins, look what happens. He begins to spread the Islamic faith throughout the Arabian Peninsula. So everything you see in the brown area on this map is the spread of Islam until Muhammad dies in the year 632 AD. And that's a lot of momentum. And from there, the religion is going to spread even further. Now, for now, I'm not going to talk about the details. In other lectures, we're going to talk about when this spreads, because the Islamic faith will spread under other people other than Muhammad. We're going to lecture on these other people. When I talk about this lecture in my Western Civ class, I do also a lecture on the history of Islam. It's not going to give you the detail of these other individuals and their role and the Umayyads and the Abbasids. We're going to do that in this class. But I do want you to recognize where the Islamic faith does spread right now, and then we'll give details a little bit later in some subsequent lectures. But you can see how it spreads all the way across what is modern-day Middle East. It spreads up into modern-day Iraq, modern-day Iran, Egypt, it spreads up North Africa, and this is interesting, it will spread up north into Spain. Why does it matter that it spreads north up into Spain? Well, the reason that's important, of course, is by now Christianity is pretty dominant in that area, right? By the time we get to about the year 700s AD, Christianity is a dominant religion in Europe, in Western Europe, and it's the Islamic faith now encroaching into Christian faith territories. Remember, in the beginning, the Islamic faith spread primarily where it was polytheistic, right? Various pagan religions. Now it's spreading into the Christian faith. The other thing to pay attention to, and we'll talk about this in more detail, is the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire, if you're not familiar with it, when the Roman Empire collapses, the Byzantine Empire is the leftovers of the Roman Empire. It's a Christian civilization as well. It follows Greek Orthodox Christianity, and eventually we're going to see some pretty big conflicts between the Byzantine Empire and the various Islamic faith as the Islamic faith continues to spread. So mainly right now, just kind of give you a map, an overview of it, just so you're familiar with it. Again, so you have all that. All right, so we've talked about the origins. We talked a little bit about the characteristics of the Islamic faith. Again, there's a lot more details about the characteristics of the Islamic faith in your book, so you want to talk about that as well. And then the spread of Islam through those battles, and we'll talk more about the spread as we talk about some other key leaders of the various dynasties that will emerge after Muhammad. There is one more very important topic, and that's the splits in Islam. So we definitely need to discuss this. This is one of the things I want you to know about, which are when you talk about the Islamic faith, just as I mentioned with any monotheistic religion, there are clearly going to be different denominations. And what you have in the Islamic faith are two major ones that I want to talk about, and then a couple other more minor ones that you should know as well. So the Sunni and the Shiite, those are the two you've probably heard about before. And so what are these ideas? What's the difference between them? So in the Islamic faith, Muhammad's going to die, right? Dies 632. And when he dies, there's immediately a discussion of who should be the caliph, right? Who should be the caliph? The word caliph is the religious leader. Who should be the caliph of the Islamic community? And there were some people who believed that the leadership of the Islamic community should come from Muhammad's closest advisors, his inner circle. Those were the Sunnis, right? The Sunnite or the Sunnis. Those were individuals who believed that the leaders of the Islamic community should come from the inner circle of Muhammad, his companions, his closest advisors, and specifically a man named Abu Bakr. So you can see his name there. And they said he should be the caliph. He should be the leader of the Islamic community. Okay, so that's clear. There was another way of thinking, which were the Shiites. And the Shiites say, no, 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 no. They argued the leaders of the Islamic community should come from the blood descendants of Muhammad. So specifically, Muhammad didn't have any sons, but he did have daughters. He had a daughter named Fatima, who was married to a man named Ali. Now, Ali was related to Muhammad as well. One of the things in the Middle East, you have a lot of first cousins marrying. It's pretty common, and so it creates this, how could he be married to Fatima and still be related to Ali? Well, to Muhammad Ali, and that's how. So anyways, so the Shiites said, no, it should come from the blood descendants. It should be Ali, because he's a man, of course. He should lead the Islamic community, and then their children should lead the Islamic community. They should be the leaders of the Islamic faith. And so the Sunnis and the Shiites, that's the essential split. And from the time they've had that split, these two groups have been fighting. You know, you hear this so often about religious conflicts between Muslims and Christians and Muslims and the historical fighting between the two. You know, there is actually a very sad reality that there's very often a lot of fighting within the religions as well. That Christians kill Christians and Muslims kill Muslims. And, you know, if you think about the number of Muslims that have killed each other between the Sunnis and the Shiites, it's a massive number of individuals. And, you know, in the 1980s, there was a war we'll talk about at the end of the semester between Iran and Iraq. And Iraq, which is a very mixed society, it's got Sunnis, got Shiites. Iran, which is heavily Shiite, had this big war, and there were about 1 million people killed. And this was one of the core reasons why this war was fought. This happened in Christianity as well. Of course, you know, knock on wood, in Christianity, it's still not going on. You don't hear Protestants killing Catholics just because of their religious interpretations. Did that happen? Yeah, it happened a lot. If you study the Protestant Reformation, but that was, you know, hundreds of years ago. So anyways, you have the Sunnis and the Shiites. Imams, the Imams are, for the Shiite faiths, the people who are the leaders of the Islamic community from the Shiites, right? So there are supposed to be 12 imams. So after Fatima and Ali, in your textbook, it kind of lists them actually. They are the Shiite has the term imams that lead the Islamic faith. It could also be used as another word as well. There are also different sects of the Shiite community, which are described in your book. There's the 12ers, the 7ers. So there are different sects as well, and definitely read about the sects in your textbooks as well. So those are the two primary ones, Sunni and Shiite. Overall, just so you know, most Muslims in the world are Sunni, not Shiite. I did find this little graph to kind of read some stuff for you, just percentage-wise. For example, in Egypt, they're 80% Sunni and about 10% Shiite, 10% Christians. Other countries like in Iraq is Turkey's like 90% Sunni and 10% Shiite. Jordan is 95% Sunni. Iran is 5%, you don't need to memorize any of this, 5% Sunni and 95% Shiite. And Iraq, which is very mixed, is like 40% Sunni and about 50% Shiite. And so you have these various, you know, splits depending on where you are in the world. But overall, most Muslims in the world are Sunni, not Shiite. You also have Sufism. Sufism is an interesting movement. It's hard to describe Sufism. Sufism is a very kind of mysticism form of Islam. They kind of they're Muslims, but they have this mysticism to them. They dance in these kind of circling motions to try to get to the state of beyond kind of where they are in physical way beings. It's really hard to explain. I'm not very good at explaining it, honestly. I'm not going to lie. I found a source, however, that helps a little bit. There's this folk character called Mullah Nasruddin. And these stories kind of typify what Sufism is about. So let me just read to you about some of this. One of the most popular folk characters in the Middle East, Mullah Nasruddin, is a vehicle of Sufi teachings. The stories of mullahs, told as jokes or moral fables, form a distinct literary genre specifically used by Sufis to express the subtle of mystical knowledge, as the seemingly simple tale can be interpreted at many levels. Let me give you a couple examples here. So one story goes as following. Mullah Nasruddin was walking along an alleyway one day when a man fell from a roof and landed on top of him. The other man was unhurt, but Nasruddin had to be taken to the hospital. What teaching can you infer from this event, master? One of his disciples asked him. Avoid belief in inevitability, even if cause and effect seem inevitable. Shun theoretical questions like, if a man falls off a roof, will his neck be broken? He fell off, but my neck is broken. And here's another little tale. Another tale illustrates the tendency of people to think in habitual patterns that may prevent them from grasping a new point of view. So again, another kind of Sufi idea here. So listen to this little story. Nusruddin used to take his donkeys across the frontier every day with the panniers loaded with straw. Since he admitted to being a smuggler when he trudged home every night, the frontier guards searched them again and again. They searched his person, sifted the straw, steeped it in water, even burnt it from time to time. Meanwhile, he was becoming visibly more and more prosperous. He then retired and went to live in another country where one of the custom officers met him years later. You can tell me now, Nasruddin, he said. Whatever was it that you were smuggling when you could never catch you? Donkeys, said Nasruddin. So that's kind of part of Sufism. They have these kind of, I believe, called whirling dervishes that they dance in this to reach this state of mysticism. You don't need to know a lot of detail about it, just so you know it is a form of Islam. No, Mullah Nasruddin is a folk story person, and you're good. The last one I want to mention is Wahhabism. And Wahhabism is more modern. You could see it's named after a man named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. You could see the dates there. And this is mainly in Saudi Arabia. And they are a very strict form of the Islamic faith. They're very, very strict Sunnis. I guess they're kind of a split off the Sunni branch. They don't believe in any other prophets other than Muhammad. And they interpret the Islamic faith in a very strict manner. They have a lot of influence in what is modern day Saudi Arabia. So it's small, right? There's not a lot of them, but there is the Wahhabism group as well. So those are the kind of splits in the Islamic faith that we have as well. So, kind of know that. Know definitely Sunnis and Shiite, know the difference. Abu Bakr and Ali, of course, the two key names you definitely want to know. Read in your textbook about the different sects. And then what we need to talk about next is how and what happens in terms of these individuals, Abu Bakr and Ali, and what happens in terms of who does emerge as the leaders of the Islamic community. And it's primarily going to be initially the Sunnis. And out of that Sunni leadership, you're going to have the first dynasties that will develop in the region. And this gets to one of the stories I really, really enjoy in this Middle Eastern history class, talking about the early dynasties. I like talking about Judaism. I find the Islamic faith interesting as well. But really, once we get into the political events, I actually enjoy that. The dynasties, the rulers, the conquests, the battles. And we'll talk about these two dynasties. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't, but the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And there's a lot of crazy stories with them. And so that's going to be kind of coming up in our next lectures. All right, as always, if you have any questions, let me know. Remember, you have quiz coming up as well. All this material you need for the quizzes. And other than that, that's about it, right? Oh, one other thing. Any of the primary sources that you have, you can also read as well. And just remember to read the textbook material on some of this stuff. All right, thank you. Bye.